At the Curry Foundation charity event, a 101-year-old woman named Dorothy Thompson approached Steph with a trembling letter in her hands and said, "Young man, you saved my life 7 years ago, and you don't even know it. This letter will change how you see your own impact on the world." No one was prepared for what was written on those pages, yellowed by time, pages that carried a secret that would forever transform the way Steph understood his true purpose. You can perceive that some encounters in life are orchestrated by forces greater than our understanding. And that was exactly what happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon at the Chase Center, during the annual Curry Foundation charity event that brought together donors, benefited families, and volunteers in a celebration of hope and social transformation. Steph was in his element, chatting animatedly with children who had received scholarships, greeting donors who made the projects possible, and posing for photos with families whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's programs. The atmosphere was charged with that special energy that only events genuinely dedicated to doing good can create. "Steph, there's a very elderly lady who's insisting on speaking with you personally," said Jennifer Walsh, his assistant, approaching him with an expression that mixed professionalism with curiosity. "She said she has something very important to deliver, something that can't wait." Jennifer had worked with Steph long enough to know how to filter requests and manage his time during events. But there was something about that centenarian lady's determination that had touched her in a special way. Great stories often begin with small details, and the detail that caught Jennifer's attention was the way Dorothy Thompson held an envelope against her chest, as if carrying something sacred. "She traveled 3 hours from Sacramento just to be here today," Jennifer continued. "The granddaughter who came with her said that Dorothy insisted on making the trip, despite her advanced age, because she had an important mission to fulfill." Steph looked in the direction Jennifer indicated and saw a tiny woman, hair white as snow, perfectly styled, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress supported by a walker, but with a posture that conveyed dignity and determination that defied her advanced age. "Of course, I'll talk to her," Steph said immediately. "Someone who makes a 3-hour trip at 101 years old definitely has something important to share." Naturally, this leads us to a reflection on how some people carry an inner strength that transcends physical limitations. Dorothy Thompson might have been 101 years old, might have needed a walker to get around. But there was something in her eyes that shone with the intensity of someone on a mission. When Steph approached, Dorothy raised her gaze and stared at him with surprising intensity. Her eyes, despite her age, were crystalline and penetrating, carrying decades of wisdom and experiences that few human beings ever accumulate. "Mr. Curry," she said, her voice trembling but firm, laden with the weight of years and the urgency of someone who has something important to say. "You don't know me, but I need you to know that you saved my life. And it wasn't on a basketball court." The statement hit Steph like lightning in a clear sky. He was accustomed to emotional fans, touching stories about how basketball had impacted their lives. But something in the way Dorothy spoke, the absolute seriousness, the unshakable conviction, made him stop completely and pay total attention. "What do you mean, Mrs.?" Steph asked, genuinely intrigued. "Dorothy Thompson," she introduced herself, extending a surprisingly firm hand to greet him. "And what I have to tell you will change how you see your own impact on the world. How is it possible that a person of 101 years can convey more authority and purpose in a few words than many achieve in entire speeches?" Steph immediately felt that he was facing something special, something that transcended a casual encounter at a charity event. Can I show you a more private place for us to talk? Steph offered, realizing that Dorothy deserved his complete attention, away from the distractions and noise of the event. That would be perfect, Dorothy replied, and there was deep gratitude in her voice, as if this moment was something she had been waiting for a long time. Robert Kim, Steph's advisor, noticed the change in dynamics and discreetly reorganized the schedule to give time for this unexpected conversation. There was something about the encounter that made everyone around realize that something important was happening. During the walk to a more private area, Dorothy walked slowly with her walker, but with unwavering determination. Caroline Miller, her 45-year-old granddaughter who accompanied her, walked alongside, clearly emotional about finally witnessing the encounter that her grandmother had planned for months. Grandma talked about this moment every day for the past weeks, Caroline whispered to Steph. She said she had a debt to pay, something she needed to deliver personally before it was too late. Great stories often begin with small details, and the detail that most caught Steph's attention was the careful way Dorothy held that yellowed envelope, as if carrying something more valuable than any material treasure. When they reached a reserved area, Steph helped Dorothy sit comfortably in an armchair, knelt beside her to be at eye level, and said, "Now tell me everything, Mrs. Dorothy. I'm listening." Dorothy took a deep breath, looked deeply into Steph's eyes, and began to speak with a mental clarity that completely defied her advanced age. "Mr. Curry, 7 years ago I was dying. Literally dying. Severe pneumonia at 94 years old, given up by the doctors, my family already preparing to say goodbye." Her voice caught slightly, but she continued with iron determination. "But then something happened that changed everything. Something you did without even knowing I existed. What's most impressive is how some revelations come to us in completely unexpected ways." Steph was expecting perhaps a story about inspiration through basketball, about how a victory had brightened her day. He wasn't prepared to discover that he had literally saved a life. "What did I do?" Steph asked, his genuine curiosity mixed with a growing sense that he was about to hear something that would change his own perspective about his role in the world. Dorothy smiled, a smile that carried 7 years of accumulated gratitude, and held the envelope more firmly. "This, my young man, is all explained in this letter I wrote to you. A letter I've carried with me every day for the past 2 years, waiting for the right opportunity to deliver it personally." She extended the envelope to Steph, her hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from pure emotion. "This letter will tell you about the miracle of December 2017, about how an impossible shot saved an impossible life to save, and about how you'll never know how many lives you touch just by being who you are. Great stories often begin with small details." And when Steph took that yellowed envelope from Dorothy Thompson's hands, he had no idea that he was about to discover the true power of his impact on the world, a power that went far beyond basketball courts and extended to the most unexpected places of human experience. The envelope weighed more than it should for a few sheets of paper. It was as if it carried the weight of 7 extra years of life, of accumulated gratitude, of a miracle that was waiting to be revealed. Steph took Dorothy to an even more private location, and, with trembling but determined hands, she handed over the envelope yellowed by time. Steph began to read those words written in the careful handwriting of someone who had an important story to tell. He wasn't prepared to discover that a single play had literally saved a human life. The envelope opened with the soft sound of old paper, revealing 3 handwritten pages in blue ink, in handwriting that, despite being slightly tremulous, was clear and determined. Steph could feel the emotional weight of those pages before he even began to read. "Dear Steph Curry," the letter began, "my name is Dorothy Thompson. I am 101 years old, and in December 2017, you saved my life without even knowing I existed." Steph stopped at the first line, looked at Dorothy, who was attentively watching his reaction, and said, "Mrs. Dorothy, in December 2017, I don't remember meeting any Dorothy." She smiled with that patience that only very wise people possess. "Keep reading, my young man. Everything will become clear. You can perceive that some revelations come to us gradually, building an understanding that completely transforms our perspective about events we thought we knew completely." Steph returned to the letter, his curiosity now intensified. "I was hospitalized at Sacramento General Hospital with severe pneumonia at 94 years old. The doctors had given up on me. My family was already preparing to say goodbye, organizing funeral details, dividing my few possessions among grandchildren and great-grandchildren." The seriousness of what he was reading made Steph look up again at Dorothy. It was hard to believe he was talking to someone who had been literally on the brink of death 7 years before, and who now, at 101 years old, had traveled 3 hours to deliver a letter personally. "But then," the letter continued, "something happened that changed everything. Something you did that night of December 15th, 2017, during the game against the Cleveland Cavaliers." Steph tried to remember specifically that date. December 2017. It was early in the season. He was recovering from an ankle injury, but the specific details of that game didn't come immediately to memory. "I was sedated with morphine," the letter continued, "drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness, when my granddaughter Caroline insisted on leaving the television on in my room because she knew I had always cheered for you, since your early days with the Warriors." Naturally, this leads us to a powerful truth about human connections. Sometimes, the people who support us most are those we never meet personally, who cheer for us from a distance, who find hope in our success without us ever knowing of their existence. Caroline told me later that I had been unconscious for almost 2 consecutive days. The doctors told the family that these were probably my last moments. But at 11:47 that night, something extraordinary happened. What's most impressive is how specific moments can become transformative landmarks in the lives of people we never imagine are watching. Steph continued reading, now completely absorbed in the narrative. "I opened my eyes exactly when that impossible play was happening. 3 seconds on the clock, you caught the ball almost out of bounds, spun in the air, and made that 3-point shot that no one believed was possible. The arena exploded. The commentators screamed that it was one of the most impossible shots in NBA history." Steph began to remember that game against Cleveland, the shot at the end of the third quarter that had gone viral, that analysts called physically impossible due to the angle and distance. He remembered the feeling that the ball had left his hands differently, almost as if guided by something greater. "At that moment," Dorothy continued in the letter, "sedated and given up by the doctors, I had a revelation that changed everything. If he can do the impossible under so much pressure, with millions of people watching, when all logic said it was impossible, then I can also fight for one more day." The words hit Steph like an emotional punch to the chest. He had never thought that a basketball shot could have existential impact on someone's life, especially someone literally fighting between life and death. "It was as if God was sending me a sign through your talent," Dorothy wrote. If the impossible can happen on a basketball court, the impossible can also happen in a hospital bed. Caroline, who was sitting next to her grandmother, leaned toward Steph. I was in the room when this happened. Grandma opened her eyes, looked at the TV, saw the replay of your shot, and said, "That boy reminded me that miracles happen when we don't give up." It was the first thing she had said in 2 days. It's impossible not to feel that some inspirations completely transcend the original context and become catalysts for transformations we could never imagine. Steph was discovering that a moment of pure athletic concentration had become a moment of pure spiritual inspiration for someone on the other side of the country. From that moment, the letter continued, something changed inside me. It wasn't instantaneous, it wasn't miraculous in the sense of immediate healing, but it was a change of perspective that saved my life. I decided to fight for one more day. Just one day. Steph turned the page, his emotion growing as he read each carefully written word. That one day became a week. The week became a month. The month became 7 years. 7 years I never would have lived if not for that moment of impossible possible that you provided me. Great stories often begin with small details. And at that moment, Steph was discovering that what for him had been an instinctive play, for Dorothy had been literally the difference between life and death. Because of that extra day that became 7 years, Dorothy wrote, I was able to see my great-grandchildren being born. I witnessed 3 weddings in the family. I taught my secret apple pie recipe to 12 granddaughters and great-granddaughters. I volunteered in hospitals reading stories to sick children. I lived the 7 most precious and meaningful years of my life. Steph stopped reading, looked at Dorothy, who was watching his reaction with those crystalline eyes full of life, and felt tears forming. Mrs. Dorothy, I didn't know. I never imagined. Of course you didn't know, my young man, Dorothy replied with tenderness. And that's exactly the point. You'll never know how many lives you touch just by being who you are, doing what you do with passion and dedication. How is it possible that actions performed with focus only on personal excellence can have such profound repercussions on the lives of people we don't even know? Steph was learning a lesson about responsibility and impact that no coach or mentor had ever taught him. Keep reading, Dorothy encouraged. The most important part is at the end. Steph returned to the letter. Mr. Curry, this letter is not just a thank you. It's a reminder that you carry a sacred responsibility. Every game you play, every shot you make, every moment of joy you provide could be the catalyst for someone somewhere, not to give up fighting. During these 7 extra years of life, I met other people in the hospital who also found inspiration in sports moments. I saw children with cancer clinging to victories from their favorite teams as reasons to face one more chemotherapy session. I saw war veterans finding hope in impossible comebacks by athletes. The revelation was becoming bigger than Steph had ever imagined. It wasn't just about Dorothy, but about a phenomenon he had never considered. The transformative power of sports in the lives of people facing their own impossible battles. What I want you to understand, the letter concluded, is that you are not just a basketball player, you are a bearer of hope. And this letter is my way of ensuring that you know this, especially in moments when you doubt your purpose or question whether what you do really matters. Great stories often begin with small details. And when Steph finished reading Dorothy Thompson's letter, he understood that he had discovered a detail about his own life that would forever change the way he saw his role in the world. It was no longer just about winning championships or breaking records. It was about being a catalyst for other people to find strength to face their own impossibles, even if he never knew that transformation was happening. Dorothy then told Steph the complete story of that December night that changed her life forever. With an impressive mental clarity for her 101 years, she reconstructed every detail of that moment that had become the watershed between giving up and fighting, between accepting the end and choosing a new beginning. "Let me tell you exactly how everything happened that night," said Dorothy, her eyes gaining a special brightness, as if she were reliving the most important moment of her long life. It was December 15th, 2017, a Thursday. I had been at Sacramento General Hospital for 8 days. Steph leaned forward, completely absorbed in the narrative he was about to hear. Caroline, Dorothy's granddaughter, also moved closer, because even she didn't know all the intimate details of that transformative night. Dr. Marcus Williams, my doctor for more than 20 years, had just left my room after a very serious conversation with Caroline. Dorothy continued. He said my body was giving up, that the pneumonia had spread too much, and that it was a matter of hours, maybe 1 or 2 days at most. You can perceive that some stories carry the weight of moments when life literally hangs between two choices: surrender or resist. And Dorothy was about to tell how one of those choices was influenced in a way no one could predict. I was drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness because of the morphine, said Dorothy, her voice carrying the memory of that experience between worlds. It was like being in a thick fog, where you hear distant voices but can't respond, where you feel people's presence but can't open your eyes. Caroline was beside me, holding my hand, and I could feel her tears falling on my arm. She was whispering prayers, talking about our family memories, trying to keep me connected to this world. Steph observed Caroline, who now had tears in her eyes, remembering those moments of despair and uncertainty. But Caroline did something that changed everything, Dorothy continued. She insisted on leaving the television on in my room, even with the doctors saying I was no longer responding to external stimuli. She said, "Grandma always cheers for Steph Curry. If there's a chance she's hearing something, let it be. The Warriors game." What's most impressive is how simple acts of love and hope can become catalysts for miracles that transcend our understanding. Caroline didn't know she was creating the conditions for a transformative moment. She just wanted to provide some comfort for her grandmother. It was the game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, Dorothy remembered with surprising precision. You were losing by 2 points, with less than a minute left in the third quarter. I heard the commentators, voices as if they came from very far away, mixed with the sounds of the hospital equipment. Steph began to remember more clearly that specific game. It had been a difficult match. He was returning from injury. The team wasn't playing with its usual chemistry. Then that impossible play happened, said Dorothy, and her voice gained an intensity that made everyone around stop to listen. 3 seconds on the clock, the ball bounced out of bounds, almost leaving the court. You ran, caught the ball, still in the air, spun in the air as if defying gravity, and shot from an angle that no human being should be able to achieve. I opened my eyes exactly at that moment. I don't know why, I don't know how, but it was as if a greater force was calling me to witness that specific instant. Naturally, this leads us to a deep reflection on synchronicity and moments that seem orchestrated by something greater than our understanding. Dorothy had returned to consciousness at the exact moment Steph made one of the most impossible shots of his career. The ball went into the basket in a way that defied all laws of physics, Dorothy continued, her eyes shining with the memory. The arena exploded. The commentators screamed that it was one of the most impossible shots in NBA history. And at that moment, Steph, I had a revelation that changed my life. Caroline leaned forward. Tell him what you said, Grandma. Exactly how you said it at that moment. Dorothy smiled, remembering her own words. I looked at the television, saw the replay of your impossible shot, and said out loud, if that boy can do the impossible when everyone thinks it's impossible, then I can also fight for one more day. It's impossible not to feel that some inspirations are born from connections that transcend physical distance and become spiritual bridges between souls that have never met personally. Caroline was shocked, Dorothy remembered. Those were the first words I had spoken in 2 days, and they were about a basketball shot. She thought I was delirious from the medication. But I knew exactly what was happening, Dorothy continued with absolute conviction. It was as if God was showing me that miracles happen when we don't give up, even when all circumstances say we should give up. Steph was visibly emotional, realizing that that shot, which for him had been instinctive, for Dorothy had been a divine message about the importance of never stopping fighting. From that moment, my young man, something fundamental changed inside me, said Dorothy. It wasn't an instantaneous miraculous cure. It was a change of perspective that saved my life. How is it possible that a change of perspective can literally save a life? Dorothy was about to explain how hope became medicine more powerful than any medical treatment. I decided to fight for one more day. Just one day. Not for the rest of my life. Not for years. That seemed too impossible. Just for 24 more hours. Inspired by your impossible shot. The next day, when Dr. Marcus Williams came to examine me, he was shocked by my improvement. My breathing was more stable, my temperature had dropped slightly, and I was responding better to treatments. Tyler Brooks, the head nurse who cared for Dorothy, had worked in intensive care for 15 years and said he had never seen such a sudden change in the condition of a patient given up for dead. Tyler told me later that my change of attitude had created a chain reaction. In fide to my organism, Dorothy explained. When we stop fighting, our body also stops. When we decide to fight, our body responds. Great stories often begin with small details, and that extra day that Dorothy had decided to fight became the first day of 7 precious years she never would have lived. Every day I improved a little. I thought about your impossible shot, said Dorothy. When physical therapy hurt, when medication made me nauseous, when I wanted to give up, I remembered, if Steph Curry can do the impossible, I can also take one more step. 1 week became a month. 1 month became 6 months. 6 months became 7 years of life that I not only lived, but lived with renewed purpose. What's most impressive is how a source of inspiration can become a life mantra, a driving force that carries us through the most difficult moments. Mr. Curry, said Dorothy, looking deeply into Steph's eyes, you taught me that impossible is just a word. And that lesson saved my life and gave me 7 years to make a difference in other people's lives. During these 7 extra years, I volunteered in hospitals, telling stories to sick children. I always ended each story saying, remember, miracles happen when we don't give up, even when everything seems impossible. Great stories often begin with small details. And at that moment, Steph understood that his impossible shot had not only scored points on a scoreboard, but had planted seeds of hope that bloomed in ways he could never imagine. Dorothy had transformed her personal inspiration into a mission to inspire others, creating a chain of hope that spread far beyond her own personal miracle. What happened after Steph completely absorbed Dorothy's story forever changed his perspective on the true power of what he did inside and outside the courts. It was as if a new dimension of responsibility and purpose had revealed itself, transforming not only how he saw basketball, but how he understood his role in the lives of millions of people he would never meet. Steph had tears in his eyes when Dorothy finished telling her story. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a complex emotion that mixed gratitude, responsibility, and a deep understanding about the impact our actions can have on lives we never imagined touching. "Mrs. Dorothy," said Steph, his voice choked with emotion, "I don't have words to express how I feel. Never, in my entire career, did I imagine that a shot could, literally, save a life." Dorothy smiled with that serene wisdom that only centenarian people possess. "My young man, that's exactly the point. You'll never know how many lives you touch just by being who you are, doing what you do with passion and excellence. You can perceive that some moments in life force us to completely recalibrate our understanding of our own purpose. Steph was experiencing exactly that recalibration, realizing that he had been operating in a much smaller dimension than his true potential for impact. "But there's one more thing I need to tell you," Dorothy continued, taking out a second, smaller envelope from her pocket. "During these 7 extra years of life, I didn't just live. I made sure to live with purpose, inspired by your example." Caroline leaned forward, curious. Even she didn't know about this second envelope. "In these 7 years, I volunteered at Sacramento Children's Hospital for more than 500 hours, reading stories to children with cancer. Children undergoing treatment for serious illnesses, children who needed hope as much as I needed it that December night. What's most impressive is how a saved life can multiply into dozens of other touched lives." Dorothy had transformed her second chance into a mission to give second chances to others. Whenever a child was discouraged, losing hope, I told about the impossible shot that saved my life. I told how I learned that miracles happen when we don't give up, even when everything seems lost. Steph was completely absorbed, realizing that the impact of his actions had created waves that spread far beyond what he could ever imagine. Samuel Martinez, 8 years old with leukemia, told me that whenever he went for chemotherapy, he thought about Grandma Dorothy's shot. Emma Rodriguez, 6 years old, with a brain tumor, created a game where she had to make impossible shots before each surgery. Tears began to flow down Steph's face. He was discovering that his inspiration had become inspiration for Dorothy, who had become inspiration for dozens of sick children, creating a chain of hope that spread through generations. "There are 17 children, Steph, 17 little warriors I met in these years, and all of them know the story of the impossible shot that saved Grandma Dorothy's life. Some drew you making that shot. Others wrote letters they never sent. All learned that impossible is just a word. It's impossible not to feel that some actions completely transcend their original context and become legends that inspire courage in places we never imagine reaching." "And you know what else?" Dorothy continued, opening the second envelope. 15 of those 17 children won their battles. 15 families have their children at home today because an 8-year-old child said, "If Grandma Dorothy could, because of Steph Curry, I can too." Steph could no longer contain his tears. The magnitude of what he was discovering was overwhelming. A single play had saved a life, which had saved 15 other lives, which would probably save more lives in the future. "This second envelope," said Dorothy, handing it to Steph, "contains letters and drawings from some of these children, and a letter from me that I want you to open only when you're going through difficult times, when you doubt your purpose, when you question whether what you do really matters." Naturally, this leads us to a powerful truth about legacies. The true legacy isn't the trophies we win, but the lives we touch, which touch other lives, creating chains of positive impact that spread through time. Steph took the envelope with reverence, as if receiving something sacred. "Mrs. Dorothy, how can I thank you for this? For teaching me something so important about my own life?" "You thank me by continuing to be who you are," Dorothy replied simply, "continuing to play with passion, to inspire with your example, to remember that every moment of excellence could be saving someone, somewhere." Caroline, who had remained emotionally contained throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "Steph, my grandmother spent the last 2 years planning this meeting. She said she had a debt to pay, a mission to fulfill before it was too late." The implication of Caroline's words weighed in the air. Dorothy, at 101 years old, knew time was precious and had used that time to ensure Steph knew about the transformative impact he had created. "Mr. Curry," said Dorothy, "I want you to know that, regardless of how many titles you win or how many records you break, you are already a champion of life, because you saved a life that saved other lives." How is it possible that a 1-hour conversation can completely change our perspective on an entire career? Steph was going through exactly that transformation, understanding that he had been playing a much bigger game than he imagined. "From today," said Steph, his voice firm but emotional, "I'll play every game knowing there might be a Dorothy Thompson watching somewhere, needing to see that impossible is just a word." Dorothy smiled, satisfied. And it's exactly that awareness that will make every shot a prayer, every victory a message of hope. Steph knelt beside Dorothy's chair and hugged her carefully, feeling the weight of 101 years of wisdom and 7 years of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for teaching me that I'm more than a basketball player, for teaching me that I'm a bearer of hope." "You always were, my young man," Dorothy replied, gently stroking Steph's head. "You just needed to discover it." Great stories often begin with small details. And 6 months after that transformative conversation, Dorothy Thompson passed away peacefully in her sleep, at 101.5 years old, but not before seeing Steph dedicate his performance in the NBA Finals for Dorothy and all who find strength to fight one more day. During that final series, Steph played like he had never played before. Not for trophies or records, but for all the Dorothys in the world who might be watching, needing to see that miracles happen when we don't give up. In the decisive game, when he made his last 3-point shot to guarantee the title, Steph looked at the cameras and whispered, "For you, Dorothy. For you and for all the lives you taught me I can touch." The envelope Dorothy had given Steph remains stored in his bedside table. He hasn't needed to open it yet, because the lesson she taught him, that he is a bearer of hope, has become his new philosophy of life. Have you ever wondered how many Dorothy Thompsons exist out there, finding inspiration in moments we consider routine? Steph now knows the answer is more than we can ever imagine. And that's why, before every game, he whispers a small prayer. May this game touch someone who needs to remember that impossible is just a word. Because some letters don't just change everything. They teach us that we were already changing everything all along. We just didn't know it. It's impossible not to feel that the true power of our existence isn't in what we conquer for ourselves, but in how much we can inspire others to conquer their own impossibles. Great stories often begin with small details. And Dorothy Thompson's letter proved that sometimes the biggest details of our life are those we'll never know existed, but that continue spreading hope long after our own story ends.